10 stories, 1 rule. If you try any of this, you're volunteering for the Darwin Awards. This video is a highlight reel of painfully avoidable deaths. DIY solutions, alcohol logic, and ego doing parkour with physics. Watch, laugh, and use it as a checklist of what not to do. 1. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the concept of administrative incompetence, but with high explosives. Our story begins in the emerald heart of Dublin, Ireland, a city known for its poets, its stout, and apparently, its incredibly punctual amateur terrorists. Meet Liam, a man whose revolutionary zeal was only eclipsed by his inability to manage a Google Calendar. Liam was an aspiring illegal bomb tinkerer, a hobbyist in the dark arts of destruction who treated volatile chemical compounds with the casual swagger of a guy assembling a sandwich. He had a target, he had a car, and he had a homemade device that looked like it was built from spare parts found in a 1980s sci-fi movie prop room. But Liam had a nemesis. It wasn't the police, it wasn't the bomb squad, and it wasn't a rival faction. His nemesis was daylight saving time. Now, for most of us, the start of daylight saving time means losing 1 glorious hour of sleep and a week of wondering why it gets dark at lunch. For Liam, however, it was a variable he simply forgot to plug into his equation of doom. The night before his grand mission, the clocks had officially shifted forward. The rest of the country had adjusted their watches, their microwaves, and their internal rhythms. Liam, living in a bubble of chaotic intent, had not. He was operating on what we call Liam Standard Time, which was running exactly 1 hour behind reality. On the fateful afternoon, Liam climbed into his nondescript sedan, placing his magnum opus, a timer-detonated explosive, on the passenger seat like a delicate, angry toddler. He checked his watch. In his mind, it was shortly before the target hour. He set the timer on the device for what he believed was a generous 60-minute buffer. Plenty of time to drive to the location, park, arm the system, and walk away looking cool while not looking back at the explosion. He turned the key, the engine purred, and he merged into traffic, feeling like the protagonist of a gritty crime thriller. He was likely rehearsing his anonymous phone call to the press, practicing his menacing voice. But here is the tragic hilarity of the situation. The timer he was using wasn't a simple kitchen egg timer. It was synchronized to the actual time of day. Because he had failed to account for the time change, the future time he set the bomb for wasn't 60 minutes away. In the cold, hard reality of the universe, that time had already arrived or was mere minutes away. As he cruised down the dual carriageway, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, he had no idea that he was essentially driving a hearse of his own making. He thought he had an hour. The universe knew he had seconds. There was no dramatic countdown, no red wire, blue wire dilemma, and no hero to swoop in. Just a man, a misunderstood clock, and a sudden, violent correction of his schedule. The device detonated while the car was in motion. The physics of an explosion inside a closed sedan are, to put it mildly, incompatible with the survival of the driver. The car was transformed instantly from a vehicle into shrapnel, and Liam was erased from the census. The police didn't need Sherlock Holmes to solve this one. The evidence was scattered across 3 lanes of traffic. It was a perfect crime, only in the sense that the perpetrator successfully eliminated the only witness, himself. Liam's legacy is now a cautionary tale about the importance of checking your settings. He proved that while time flies when you're having fun, it moves significantly faster when you're an incompetent bomb maker who ignores the government's mandate to change the clocks. He didn't just lose an hour, he lost the whole timeline. 2. We often hear about the dangers of drowsy driving, but let's talk about the significantly underreported danger of drowsy existing in places where human beings have no business being vertical, let alone horizontal. Enter our next contestant for the Darwin Award, a man from New Jersey whom we shall call Sleeping Beauty of the Turnpike. This gentleman, let's name him Gary, was having a night that started with a beverage and ended with a decision so profoundly stupid it defies mammalian survival instincts. Gary had been out on the town, consuming a quantity of alcohol that effectively disconnected his brain from the concept of danger. Stumbling home in the wee hours of the morning, Gary found himself confronting the New Jersey highway system, a sprawling, concrete labyrinth of high-speed metal. To a sober person, a highway is a do-not-cross zone. To drunk Gary, the median strip, that narrow patch of grass separating the northbound and southbound lanes, looked like an invite-only VIP camping spot. It was grassy, it was flat, and in his inebriated logic, it was free real estate. Why walk another mile to a bed when the state had provided this lovely green mattress right here in the middle of traffic? Gary, displaying the agility of a confused sloth, navigated across the lanes. How he didn't get hit crossing the road is a statistical miracle in itself, a momentary glitch in the matrix of fate. He reached the median, triumphant. He didn't just pass out, oh no, Gary was committed to comfort. He laid out a blanket. Yes, a blanket. This implies a level of premeditation that makes the stupidity even richer. He prepared for bed as if he were in a Holiday Inn, fluffing his makeshift pillow while cars whizzed by at 75 miles per hour on either side of his head. The roar of the engines? White noise. The shaking of the ground? A gentle massage feature. Gary curled up and drifted off into a deep alcohol-fueled coma, blissfully unaware that he had turned himself into a speed bump in the middle of a vehicular war zone. The night passed. Gary survived the darkness, which is frankly incredible. But then came the dawn. And with the dawn came the morning commute, the most aggressive, coffee-fueled migration of heavy machinery known to man. As the sun rose, visibility was tricky, and drivers were fighting glare and sleepiness. One unfortunate commuter, perhaps changing lanes to avoid a slow truck or just drifting slightly in the chaos of rush hour, did not expect a human bedroom to be located on the median strip. The driver didn't see Gary until it was far, far too late. The tragedy here is twofold. One, the loss of life, and two, the absolute nightmare caused for thousands of people just trying to get to work. Gary didn't just die, he became a traffic alert. Expect delays on I-95 due to a man who mistook the highway for a hammock. The police report likely read like a piece of surrealist fiction. Officers arrived to find a scene that made no logical sense. There was no broken-down car, no sign of a struggle, just a guy who thought the median was a reasonable place to catch some Z's. Gary's death serves as a brutal reminder that location is everything. He achieved the deepest sleep of all, proving that while the early bird gets the worm, the guy sleeping in the middle of the highway gets the bumper. 3. Let's hop across the pond to England, a land of cozy cottages, roaring fireplaces, and homeowners who possess a dangerous amount of confidence and a complete lack of understanding regarding fluid dynamics. Meet Arthur. Arthur was a man who loved a warm fire but hated the maintenance that came with it. One chilly afternoon, he noticed his chimney wasn't drawing smoke. Instead of drifting up into the gray British sky, the smoke was backing up into his living room, choking his family and ruining the upholstery. A blockage. A rational human being, let's say anyone with a survival instinct, would call a chimney sweep. You know, a professional with brushes, vacuums, and training. But Arthur was cheap, and Arthur was impatient. He looked at the blockage and thought, I can fix this with a bang. His solution was not a brush, but a firework. And not just a sparkler. We're talking about a heavy-duty, industrial-grade pyrotechnic, the kind of thing you use to signal ships at sea or celebrate the end of a war. His plan was Wile E. Coyote levels of simple. Drop the firework down the chimney, let it explode, and the shockwave would dislodge the soot and debris. Genius, right? Arthur climbed onto his roof, navigating the slick tiles with the grace of a drunk penguin. He approached the chimney pot, lit the fuse of his explosive cleaning device, and dropped it down the flue. Now the blockage was actually a tightly packed jackdaw's nest, a fortress of mud and sticks that was stronger than concrete. The firework didn't fall through. It got stuck, wedged tight just a few feet down. A smart man runs away now. A smart man accepts he has made a bomb and evacuates the roof. Arthur was not a smart man. When he didn't hear the thud of it hitting the bottom, curiosity overtook his brainstem. He did the one thing, the only thing, you must never do with a live explosive in a tube. He leaned over the chimney pot to look inside. He put his face directly over the barrel of what was now effectively a loaded mortar cannon. "I wonder what it's doing," he probably thought. What it was doing was exploding. The blast had nowhere to go but up. The chimney acted as a directional nozzle, focusing all the force, heat, and soot directly into Arthur's inquisitive face. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap from hell that rang his bell like a church on Sunday. But it wasn't the explosion that killed him directly. It was the surprise. The concussive blast slapped him in the face with the force of a prizefighter, blinding him with soot and terrifying him to his core. In his panic and shock, Arthur recoiled violently. He lost his footing on the slippery roof tiles. There was a moment of weightlessness, a flailing of arms, and then gravity took the wheel. He tumbled down the slope, over the gutter, and plummeted to the patio below. The fall was fatal. The irony? The jackdaw's nest was perfectly fine. It survived the blast completely intact. Arthur had sacrificed his life to slightly singe a bird's home. He died as he lived, trying to save 20 quid on professional help and paying the ultimate price for it. It's a timeless lesson. If you have to look down the barrel of a cannon to see if it's working, assume it is, and assume you're about to be the punchline. 4. Let's talk about the relationship between man and machine. Usually, it's a symbiotic one. We feed them electricity, and they feed us entertainment. But sometimes that relationship turns toxic, and the breakup can be downright lethal. Travel with me to a grim, concrete apartment block in Russia, where we meet Ivan. Ivan was a man of simple pleasures, chief among them being his nightly ritual of watching state-sponsored news and reruns of soap operas. However, the centerpiece of his living room was not a sleek, lightweight flat screen. It was a beast from a bygone era. We are talking about a massive cathode ray tube television, a plastic and glass boulder that weighed as much as a small refrigerator and emitted a low-level hum that could probably communicate with whales. This television, let's call it the brick, had been failing for months. It would flicker, the color would turn a nauseating shade of green, and the sound would cut out at the most dramatic moments. On this particular Tuesday, Ivan had had enough. The TV cut out right in the middle of a penalty kick, and Ivan's temper, which was already shorter than a fuse on a stick of dynamite, finally snapped. He decided that this machine didn't just need to be replaced, it needed to be executed. He unplugged the electronic dinosaur, wrestling with the tangled nest of cables that had accumulated over a decade, fueled by the adrenaline of pure, unadulterated rage. His plan was simple and dramatic: defenestration. He was going to heave the cursed object out of his fifth-floor window and watch it shatter into a million satisfying pieces on the pavement below. It was a symbolic act, a reclaiming of his sanity. Ivan, sweating and cursing, hauled the heavy box to the windowsill. Now, anyone who has ever lifted a CRT TV knows that the weight distribution is treacherous. All the glass is in the front, making it front-heavy. Ivan, blinded by his quest for vengeance, failed to account for this critical physics lesson. He opened the window, letting in the cold Russian air, and prepared for the heave. He wanted the full experience. He didn't just want to drop it, he wanted to see the impact. He wanted to witness the moment the screen imploded, a visual confirmation of his victory over technology. As he gave the mighty shove, pushing the TV out into the void, he kept his hands on the sides just a fraction of a second too long, guiding it. He leaned his upper body out the window, eyes wide with anticipation. But Newton's third law is a cruel mistress. The momentum of the heavy, falling television acted like an anchor. Because Ivan was leaning so far forward, his center of gravity shifted past the point of no return. The TV went down, and because he was practically hugging it goodbye, Ivan went with it. He tipped over the sill, his legs leaving the safety of his apartment floor. For a brief, terrifying second, man and machine were united in freefall, a synchronized dive towards the concrete. The satisfying explosion he wanted to see became the last thing he ever experienced, but from a much closer vantage point than he intended. He landed on top of the television, or perhaps it landed on him. The forensics were a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. The neighbors heard the crash, a mix of shattering glass and a dull thud that signaled the end of Ivan's war on appliances. He died instantly, a victim of his own dramatic flair and a poor understanding of leverage. In the end, the TV technically won the fight. It took its attacker down with it, proving that in Soviet Russia, you don't break TV. TV breaks you. 5. Have you ever looked at a breathtaking natural wonder, a majestic cliff, a roaring waterfall, a serene mountaintop, and thought, you know what this place needs? Freshly pressed linens. No? That's because you are a sane human being. But let me introduce you to the baffling world of extreme ironing. Yes, this is a real sport, or at least a sport, in the same way that competitive eating is a sport. It exists, but it raises a lot of questions about the human condition. Our next hero is Nigel, a British enthusiast who took his domestic chores far too seriously. Nigel was a devotee of this adrenaline-fueled laundry service. He believed that the thrill of danger enhanced the crispness of a cotton blend. On a blustery afternoon on the southern coast of England, Nigel decided to attempt a press on the edge of a towering chalk cliff. We are talking about a 200-foot drop straight down to jagged rocks and churning sea. A normal person approaches this edge with caution, perhaps crawling on their stomach to take a peek. Nigel approached it with a fold-out ironing board and a battery-powered travel iron. He set up his station mere inches from the precipice, creating a tableau of domesticity in the face of certain death. The wind was whipping up the cliff face, the kind of gust that knocks seagulls off course, but Nigel was undeterred. He laid out a nice button-down shirt, likely a light blue Oxford, and began to work on the collar. Now, the physics of an ironing board are inherently unstable. They are wobbly, top-heavy contraptions, even in the safety of a laundry room. Put one on an uneven, grassy cliff edge in a gale-force wind, and you have built a catapult. As Nigel focused intently on a stubborn crease near the pocket, a sudden gust of wind caught the ironing board. Most people would let the board go. They would watch the shirt and the appliance tumble into the abyss and say, well, that's a shame. But Nigel's instincts were wired wrong. He lunged to save his equipment. He grabbed for the board as it tipped, shifting his weight onto his front foot, which was resting on a patch of slick, damp grass. Friction, the only thing keeping him on the mortal coil, decided to take a coffee break. Nigel slipped. In his desperate attempt to save a $30 shirt, he sacrificed his future. He went over the edge, tumbling 200 feet in a tragic, flailing descent that no amount of starch could stiffen. He hit the rocks below with tragic finality. The Coast Guard recovery team later found him, and the irony, pun absolutely intended, was palpable. Lying near his body was the ironing board and the shirt. And here is the kicker, the detail that proves the universe has a sick sense of humor. The shirt was immaculate. He had actually done a great job. He died for a wrinkle-free garment. Nigel's death is a stark reminder that some chores are meant to be boring. Ironing is a safe, indoor activity. By trying to make it extreme, Nigel didn't become a legend of sport. He became a cautionary tale about priority management. He proved that while cleanliness is next to godliness, doing laundry on a cliff edge is next to deadliness. 6. There is a time and a place for romance. A candlelit dinner? Perfect. A walk on the beach? Classic. A secluded cabin? Wonderful. A set of active railway tracks in the middle of the night? That, my friends, is what we in the business call natural selection in action. Our next story takes us to the outskirts of a town in Ukraine, where a young couple, let's call them Romeo and Juliet, though even Shakespeare would have found this plot twist too stupid, were looking for a private spot to express their affection. They wanted seclusion. They wanted a place where no prying eyes would disturb them. They found a stretch of railway tracks that ran through a dark, wooded area. Now, most people look at train tracks and see a transportation corridor for massive, heavy steel machines that cannot stop or swerve. This couple looked at the tracks and saw a bed. I wish I was making this up. They decided that the gravel ballast and the cold steel rails were the ideal mattress for their night of passion. They lay down right between the rails. Let's pause to analyze the sensory environment here. Train tracks are uncomfortable. They are covered in sharp rocks and grease. But apparently, love is not only blind, it is also numb to orthopedic distress. As they became, shall we say, engrossed in the act, their sensory awareness of the outside world shut down completely. They were in their own little bubble of endorphins. But the outside world was very much active, specifically in the form of a heavy freight train hurtling towards them at 60 miles per hour. Now, you might ask, didn't they hear the train? Trains are loud, they vibrate the ground, they have horns. But here's the thing about lying on the tracks. The sound of an approaching train can be deceptive, and the vibration of the rails might have been misinterpreted by the couple as, well, part of the experience. They were so focused on their own rhythm that they missed the rhythm of the 5,000-ton locomotive bearing down on them. The train engineer likely saw them at the very last second, a shadow on the tracks. But stopping a freight train takes a mile, not a meter. There was no time for breaks, no time for warnings. The love train arrived, but it wasn't the OJs singing soul music. It was a wall of steel. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. The couple didn't just have their mood ruined. They were deleted from existence. They went from the height of pleasure to the afterlife in a fraction of a second. The police report was a grim document of confusion. Why there? Why then? There were open fields nearby. There were parked cars. There were literally millions of square miles of Ukraine that weren't the direct path of a locomotive. This couple died because they prioritized privacy over survival. They wanted to feel the earth move, and they succeeded, but unfortunately, the thing moving the earth was a diesel engine. It is a tragic, yet undeniably foolish way to go. They died doing what they loved, in the place where they least should have been doing it. It's a harsh lesson for lovers everywhere. Get a room, or a car, or a tent. Anything that doesn't run on a schedule and weigh as much as a building. 7. Welcome to the Sunshine State, Florida, a land where the headlines are as humid as the weather and the logic is frequently on vacation. Meet Kyle, a man who turned his suburban living room into a low-budget, high-risk petting zoo. Kyle was an enthusiast of the "if it can kill me, I should keep it in a glass box next to the TV" school of thought. His collection wasn't hamsters or goldfish. It was a writhing inventory of the world's most potent neurotoxins wrapped in scales. But keeping them wasn't enough for Kyle. Oh no, he had to interact with them. Over the years, he had developed a terrifyingly delusional theory. He believed he was building up a natural immunity to snake venom. This is the biological equivalent of thinking you can build up an immunity to bullets by shooting yourself with small calibers every day. It is pseudoscience at its most lethal. His prized possession was a black mamba, a snake that nature designed to be the Grim Reaper's personal whip. For those who skipped biology class, the black mamba is not a cuddly creature. It is faster than you, angrier than you, and its venom shuts down your nervous system before you can finish saying, "Oops." One humid Tuesday, Kyle decided to prove his superhuman tolerance to a group of friends, and of course a camera, because if you don't stream your stupidity, did it even happen? He bypassed the safety hooks, the tongs, and the gloves. He reached into the enclosure with his bare hands, confident that his vibes and his imaginary immunity would protect him. He treated one of the planet's apex predators like a golden retriever that just needed a belly rub. The mamba, however, did not subscribe to Kyle's podcast on interspecies friendship. It saw a large, warm threat invading its space and reacted with millions of years of evolutionary instinct. It struck. The bite was lightning fast, a double tap of fangs into Kyle's forearm. Now, this is the moment where a sane person screams, calls 911, and prays for anti-venom. But Kyle? Kyle was a prisoner of his own ego. He looked at the bite, looked at the camera, and essentially said, "'Tis but a scratch." He refused to call for help, insisting to his horrified friends that he just needed to ride it out and let his system handle it. He sat on his couch, sweating, waiting for his superpowers to kick in. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The neurotoxin did exactly what it was chemically engineered to do. It paralyzed his diaphragm. The transition from "look how cool I am" to "I literally cannot breathe" was rapid and horrifying. By the time the panic set in and the ambulance was finally called, it was far too late. Kyle was found on his living room floor, a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect in its deadliest form. He died not just from a snake bite, but from a terminal overdose of arrogance. The snake, for the record, was fine, likely wondering why the warm tree that invaded its home had suddenly stopped moving. Kyle's legacy is a stark reminder to the world. You cannot biohack your way out of a black mamba bite, and confidence is not an antidote. 8. Let's take a trip down to Brazil, home of the Amazon rainforest and apparently spiders the size of dinner plates that have absolutely zero sense of humor. Our next cautionary tale features a man named Mateo, whose understanding of pest control was derived entirely from cartoons where the human always wins. Mateo was out for a walk on his rural property when he stumbled upon something that would make a normal person faint, cry, or incinerate the entire zip code: a massive, pulsating spider nest. We aren't talking about a cute little cobweb in the corner. We are talking about a fortress of silk housing hundreds of what were likely Brazilian wandering spiders. For context, these arachnids are aggressive, highly venomous, and known for not backing down from a fight. A rational response to finding a legion of 8-legged death machines is to slowly back away and perhaps consider moving to Antarctica. Mateo, however, chose violence. He decided that he, a soft-skinned primate with no armor, was going to handle the situation manually. He didn't have professional gear. He didn't have pesticide. He had a stick and a can of something that was definitely not spider strength. Maybe he thought he could poke them into submission. Maybe he thought he could shoo them away like pigeons. He approached the nest with an aggression that can only be described as suicidal. He poked, he prodded, he sprayed his ineffective mist. He effectively rang the doorbell of hell and asked to speak to the manager. The spiders, sensing an attack, did not retreat. They swarmed. It was like a scene from a horror movie, but with real consequences. They poured out of the nest, fast and furious, covering the ground and climbing Mateo with terrifying speed. He wasn't bitten once. He was bitten dozens of times. The venom of the Brazilian wandering spider causes intense pain, loss of muscle control, and respiratory paralysis. As the swarm engulfed him, Mateo realized too late that he had brought a stick to a chemical warfare fight. He tried to brush them off. He tried to run. But the neurotoxins were already coursing through his veins, shutting down his body's ability to function. He collapsed right there in the grass, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of nature's fury. He died alone, defeated by an army he provoked for no reason. When he was found, the evidence of his folly was clear. He had picked a fight with nature, assuming that being human gave him the upper hand, forgetting that in the wild, numbers and venom always trump ego. Mateo's death serves as a brutal lesson in respect. When you see a writhing ball of spiders, you do not poke it. You walk away, you respect the boundaries of the animal kingdom, and you thank your lucky stars you didn't decide to engage in hand-to-hand combat with a creature that has 8 hands and fangs. 9. Germany. A nation famous for its precision engineering, its fast cars, and its love affair with liquid gold, beer. But as our next story proves, even the things we love can turn against us if we ignore the laws of physics. Enter Hans, a warehouse worker and beer enthusiast who took the concept of "hold my beer" to a tragic extreme. Hans was working late, tasked with organizing inventory in a brewery distribution center. He was a big guy, strong as an ox, and possessed a stubborn streak that would rival a mule. He needed to move a massive, industrial-sized metal keg. We are not talking about the little pony kegs you see at college parties. We are talking about a colossal vessel containing hundreds of liters of brew, weighing as much as a small car. The safety protocols for moving such an object are clear. Use a forklift, use a team, or use a crane. Hans looked at the safety manual, laughed in German, and decided that machinery was for the weak. He was going to move it himself, using nothing but raw muscle and bad judgment. He managed to get the behemoth rolling. Now, here is a quick physics lesson for everyone. Liquid loads are dynamic. When you roll a solid rock, it behaves predictably. When you roll a giant metal drum filled with liquid, the liquid sloshes. This creates kinetic energy shifts that make the object feel alive and malicious. Hans got the keg moving down a slight incline. He felt powerful. He felt like Hercules. But then, the keg picked up speed. The beer inside sloshed forward, adding momentum that Hans hadn't calculated. He realized it was going too fast. Instead of stepping aside and letting the keg smash into a wall, Hans made the fatal decision to try and stop it with his body. He planted his feet and threw his hands up, attempting to catch a rolling ton of steel like a goalkeeper catching a soccer ball. It was a contest between flesh and bone versus steel and fluid dynamics. Physics didn't even blink. The keg didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. It rolled right over him. It crushed him with the indifferent weight of 1,000 Oktoberfests. The force was so immense that it wasn't just an injury, it was a flattening. Hans was pinned, crushed by the very product he dedicated his life to moving. He died of massive internal trauma, effectively squeezed out of existence by his own stubbornness. The irony is thicker than the foam on a stout. A man killed by beer, not by drinking it, but by wrestling it. He proved that while beer can be a friend, a flying keg is a deadly enemy that does not respect your gym gains. 10. We live in the age of the selfie, a cultural phenomenon where if you didn't take a picture of yourself doing something, it didn't happen. This need for digital validation has created a new breed of daredevil, the rooftopper. These are people who climb skyscrapers without safety gear to take photos that make normal people's palms sweat. Enter Dmitry, a thrill-seeker in Russia who treated gravity like a suggestion rather than a law. Dmitry wanted the ultimate profile picture. He wanted a shot that would garner thousands of likes and cement his status as a fearless urban explorer. He found his stage, a high-rise residential block on the outskirts of Moscow, a brutalist concrete giant rising hundreds of feet into the gray sky. It was a windy day, the kind of cold Russian wind that numbs your fingers in seconds, but Dmitry was undeterred by hypothermia warnings. He scaled the maintenance ladder and reached the roof. But standing on the roof wasn't enough. No, to get the perfect angle, he needed to hang off the edge. He set up his phone or held it in one hand. The details are a bit shaky, unlike his hands should have been, and lowered himself over the precipice. He was hanging by his fingertips, dangling over a drop that would give a gargoyle vertigo. He smiled for the camera, the wind whipping his hair, the ground a distant abstract painting below. He got the shot. But then came the part he hadn't rehearsed. Getting back up. Hanging by your fingers requires immense grip strength. Hanging by your fingers while freezing cold, with adrenaline crashing and wind buffeting you, requires superhuman strength. Dmitry tried to pull himself up. His fingers, numb from the cold and slick with the sweat of panic, began to fail. The concrete ledge offered no mercy. He scrambled, his boots scraping uselessly against the smooth facade of the building. There was a moment, a horrific, silent moment, where he realized that his grip was slipping and there was no backup save file. He wasn't a video game character. He was a bag of biology fighting gravity, and gravity had a perfect record. His fingers slipped. He fell. The descent was long enough for him to regret every life choice that led him to that cornice. He plummeted down the side of the building, a tragic figure falling from grace, or at least from the roof. He impacted the pavement with fatal certainty. The most biting irony? His phone likely survived, or at least the cloud backup did. The photo exists. He got the likes. He got the fame. He just wasn't around to check the notifications. Dmitry's death is a somber, thoroughly modern parable. No amount of internet clout is worth trading your life for. He proved that while a picture is worth 1,000 words, a selfie hanging off a skyscraper is worth exactly one life. All right, comment your pick. Which death was the dumbest, I can totally handle this moment? The chimney firework, the snake immunity guy, the highway nap, or the rooftop show-off? And give it a score from 1 to 10 on the stupidity scale. If you laughed or cringed, hit like and subscribe. More Darwin-level chaos is coming.